I lived in Wisconsin and worked at a covert restaurant when I had this horrible experience. At the time, I had an old clunker for a car. It would get me to and from work, sure, but it was one of those cars that every time you drove it, you just knew something was eventually going to happen. You always just hoped that when it did, it was going to be nice outside at least. Of course, that's never how it actually works out. The day I finally had the problem with my car, it was definitely not a nice day. It had been snowing hard all day long, and the ride to work had been bad enough. This day just got worse and worse. While I was working the closing shift, I don't think the entire 9 hours I was at work the snow even slowed down once. It was just constant, even though the plows had been running all day long. They could only do so much before the roads just ended up covered once they left. We closed at 10 p.m. or so, and it took us another 45 minutes to clean up the store. There was one coworker and one manager with me. We locked up all the doors and then went our own ways. It felt quite good to get out of work finally. I knew it would feel even better to get home, but I was not looking forward to the journey there. I lived a good 10 miles away, and in these weather conditions that ride was going to take forever. I had only gotten about halfway there when the very worst thing happened. I blew a tire. I was panicked at first. I was worried I was going to wreck the car due to the lack of traction on the ice. Somehow, though, I managed to pull into the parking lot of a nearby office building. Although I did have a spare, I didn't have a jack or anything to get the lug nuts off the tire apparently. Yeah, I know it's stupid, but I always thought I'd have the time to get those things if I ever needed them. Now I had no idea what I was going to do. There was no way I could just walk home, and I definitely couldn't leave my car here either. Even if I could call a taxi, if I left my car there it might get towed away, and I just could not afford a towing fee right now. I tried my best to get a hold of some friends, but nobody was answering their phone that day. I waited there in my car for a while, just watching the snow fall and wondering what I could do in this situation. I wasn't in the parking lot for more than 15 minutes when an SUV pulled off the road and drove over to me. I was immediately worried I was about to get in some trouble for idling in the parking lot, but I was also hopeful this was just someone trying to help me. A big, husky, bearish-looking man climbed out of this SUV and walked up to my car. He knocked gently on the window, and I rolled it down.
"Hey there, need some help changing a tire?" the burly man said.
"Yeah, I don't have any jacks or tools on me. I do have the tire, though," I explained to him. The man, as nice as could be, told me he had some tools and would be more than willing to help me change my tire. I'm not a particularly big guy myself, and I'd never had to do it before. This guy seemed thankfully genuinely willing to help me out. He went over to his SUV and got his tools. I thanked him profusely. As he began to change the tire, I got out of the car and stood behind him. I told him from now on I would get the tools, and if this ever happened again, I would be prepared from then on. While the man was explaining to me what to do though, I caught something in the very corner of my eye. I didn't know what it was at first, but looking back towards that SUV, I saw the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my life. There was a person, bloodied up with duct tape over her mouth, trying to climb into the front of the car. Her hands were duct taped together as well, and her eyes were desperate for help. I was immediately scared to death. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't like I could fight this guy. He would tear me apart without even trying. I figured the only thing I could do was not let on that I just noticed her, and memorize his license plate number, call the police when he left. The rest of the tire change was just terrifying. I had no idea what that man was going to do with me. I didn't know if he was just trying to be helpful, or if he wanted to hurt me too. I tried my best not to look nervous, but every time he moved closer, I nearly jumped out of my skin. When he had finally changed the tire and began to lower the car back down, I reached into my pocket and grabbed my car keys. He picked up the jack and asked me to lean over and take a look. I really didn't want to do so, but I did it very slowly while making sure to keep an eye on him. When he saw how slowly I was moving, he picked up his tools and went over to put them in the back of his car. Immediately, I grabbed my keys out of my pocket, threw my door open, and slammed it shut. I looked in the mirror and saw the man had noticed me. He began to move quickly around the SUV. I turned on my own car. Thank God horror movie cliches don't happen in real life. My car started right away. I put it in gear and took off before the man could get to the side of my car. I pulled away, slipping more than once on the ice and almost sending my car spinning. Eventually, I did get away, and it was long before he had a chance to get into his SUV and follow me. I drove straight to the police station to tell them what I'd witnessed. While I was giving my statement, they sent the cars out to the parking lot. They found the girl still duct-taped and nearly naked, lying frozen and covered in snow in the parking lot. The man must have figured he'd gotten caught and dumped her. He probably hadn't figured I'd had the time to memorize his plate numbers. I'm very happy to report the police found him as well. I testified at his trial, and he went to prison. The woman turned out to actually be his girlfriend. She was very convinced he wanted to kill her, and very thankful to me that my tire had gone out that night, and I'd called the police to come help. I don't really know what I was thinking when I set up my classes and my living situation during my second year of college. My school had a huge campus, nearly 800 acres or so. I was a physics major, and I knew the building where all the physics classes were held. During my freshman year, I'd had to stay in a specific dorm which was built just for freshmen. This was in the middle of campus. As a sophomore, though, I could choose which building I wanted to stay in. I got into the honors dorm due to my 4.0 and chose to stay there for that year. It just so happened to also be on the far side away of campus from the building the physics classes were located in. The reason all of this is even relevant at all is I never took into account just how difficult it would be for me to get to my class and back to my dorm during the cold weather. Don't get me wrong, during the early fall and spring, it was really awesome to get all that exercise and get that good mood and the good weather. I lived in a very northern state though, and it tended to get absolutely frigid in the late fall and all throughout winter. I also liked to sleep in a lot, so I would take as many classes as I could in the evening. You can guess what this led to. In late November, I was in the dorm room watching the news, and the weather said we were supposed to be getting quite a bad snowstorm that evening. Although I really did love being in class, I was really hoping that this evening they would be canceled, and I could just spend the evening alone in my room instead. Checking out the college's website, I was upset to find that classes were canceled, but only in the morning and the following day. Evening classes were not. I trudged my way over to class as the snowflakes fell all around me. I wasn't too shocked to see there were not a whole lot of other students out there with me. We had a huge enrollment, but most likely, most were going to blow off this class. It was a regular class I'd upgraded to an honors class, so I really couldn't afford to miss this one. Interestingly enough, most of the other physics students I hadn't seen on my way there. There weren't more than 10 in the entire classroom. I sat down in the front and got settled in for a nice 2-hour lecture. There were no windows in that classroom, so I had absolutely no idea just how bad the snow was falling. I did have a good idea I was going to get some wet feet once I got back to my room, though. Once the class ended, the other students filed out, but I stayed behind and asked the professor a few clarifying questions. Once I was done, he left to go back to his office, and I was pretty much left all alone. I walked over to the door and looked out the tiny window frame on it. What I saw disheartened me greatly. The snow was loose and already knee-deep. It was also currently falling really hard. Visibility was crap. It was going to be a pain in the ass and a long walk to get back to my room. I kept looking out the window, trying to muster up my courage, before I finally figured it wasn't going to get any better just standing here. Putting the collar of my coat up and pulling down my hat, I went outside. It sucked immediately. Not only was it much, much colder than it had been on the way there, but the snow was actually stinging me as it hit my skin. It was like hurting my eyes so much I had to shade them. This made my already weakened visibility even worse. I had incorrectly assumed the snow was falling loose and that's why it had piled up so much. In actuality, it was very difficult to walk through such compact snow. I was pretty much all alone as well. As I walked further towards the center of campus, I finally saw one other person walking outside as well. Up ahead, just on the walkway, there was someone standing underneath a light post. I could only make out their shadow really, since it was so hard to see. Whoever this person was though, they'd obviously noticed me too, and gave me what looked to be a friendly wave. I felt a little bit relieved to not be out here in this state alone. The person, who I assume was a student, was motioning for me to catch up with them. The wind and snow was still stinging my eyes. It was going to take a bit of effort to catch them. They were standing in the direction I was walking anyway though. As I got closer and closer trying to make out their features, the very first thing I noticed was that whoever it was not very big and had what looked like long curly hair. I figured this must be a girl or something. It looked like they were holding a purse, although it could have been a book bag as far as I knew. They kept on motioning for me to come closer and closer. This began to seem a little weird. As I squinted even further against the snow, I noticed that this mystery person was not standing there alone. There appeared to be a second person there, laying in the snow. I hadn't noticed at first because it was so deep. As soon as I saw that person, I put two and two together and realized why the shadow outline person kept on beckoning me. It seemed their friend must have fallen down in the snow and gotten hurt, and they needed my help to move them. Feeling mighty heroic, I began pushing harder and risking slipping myself when I actually heard the person on the ground call out for help. It seemed odd she was doing so. Her friend was literally right next to her. When I finally got close enough to make out the features of the person who was standing there though, I realized just why that girl was screaming for help. The guy was wearing a dark trench coat, and the curly hair was from a pullover clown mask he was wearing. He was standing on the legs of the girl who was laying on the ground. Feeling even more heroic spirit, I thought I must try and help this girl right now. She was obviously being held down by this clown. Who knew what he was going to do? I was not very big, but she was obviously hurt, and this might be the only chance she had to get away. When the man saw my concern, though, he surprised me and started to back away a bit. He put his hands up as if to show me he was innocent. I walked over to the girl. When I put my hand out to help her up, she uncovered her head and turned to look at me. My heart skipped a beat when I saw she was also wearing a clown mask. She pulled a knife out from under herself and actually stabbed me in the leg. I fell backward into the snow. I watched as she hopped up off the ground. I tried to get up to move, but I had forgotten about the clown that had backed off. He had actually slipped around behind me and grabbed me roughly, pulling me to my feet. Once I was up, he held one of my arms behind my back. The other he wrapped around my chest. The girl clown was now fully up as well. She moved close to me through the snow. I struggled to try and throw the clown behind me off, but I couldn't get any leverage with this slippery ground. As the girl clown came closer to me with that knife, I did the only thing I could think to do in that moment. I clumsily kicked some snow at her. There was enough of it to throw her off guard for a moment, I suppose, but it didn't really do me any good. The male clown just gripped my arm even harder, and the girl clown quickly gained her composure back. She walked up to me again, brandishing the knife and holding it up. Once she was close enough, I could see her eyes. The female clown put the knife up against my face and pressed the tip into it. I yelped as it pierced my skin. She dragged the knife down, making a shallow cut on my cheek, and whispered in my ear, "Stevenson, 302, my door number." The clown behind me threw me onto the ground. I was worried about my face, sure, but I was happy he was about to let me go. As I was trying to stumble to my feet, I noticed them hurrying away. It didn't take long until both clowns were lost to the snow. Should I have felt relieved? Yeah, I really thought they were going to kill me. Did I feel relieved though? No. They knew who I was, and they knew which room mine was too. They were obviously willing to hurt me as well. Worst thing was, I had no idea who these people could be, what they looked like, or when I would see them again. Fortunately, housing let me change apartments immediately. I was pissed I had to leave the honors dorm, but a room had opened up next door to the science building at least. I never found out who those clowns were, and I have no idea if I ever saw them again without their disguises. They could have been anyone. They could have even had a class with me, and I would have never even known. My brother was a real jerk. Growing up, I liked animals quite a lot, and a lot of times just to spite me, he would always be an ass to them. I once had a cat. He would take it and throw it into the laundry dryer, then turn it on for a minute. He would open the door and the cat would bolt out in a panic. He would also put it into a bucket, hold it in there, and hang the bucket from a tree branch. He would then pull the branch down and launch the cat into the air like a catapult. The cat would do several somersaults before luckily landing on its feet and running away. He would do all kinds of dreadful things, then laugh at me when I cried and tried to get him to stop. The worst thing my brother ever did to an animal, though, happened late one summer night. Our parents were out of town, and he happened to be watching me. Our other brother, as much of a jerk as he was, did let us stay up late at least. That was pretty nice. We had a nice house in the country, and it was nice to stay up late in the summer. On the first night my parents were away, around midnight we heard this barking and growling out in our front yard. Obviously, some dog was out there. I looked out the window and saw a ragged husky standing just off our front porch. The poor thing looked like it had been through hell. It was dirty, had patches of hair missing in places, and may have even been sick. We ignored it for the most part, because dogs in the yard were not an unusual thing. Eventually, it left all on its own. The following night, we heard the dog barking again. I looked out the window only to see it was the same old husky. It was odd that the dog had come back around the same time, but we didn't really give it too much mind. Again, dogs in the yard were not an unusual thing. After a while, it left once more. We heard the dog barking again around midnight the following night. As I had done the previous nights before, I checked out the window and saw it was the same husky. I told my brother I was a bit scared this dog kept on coming back. Well, as you might imagine, telling him that was a mistake. Letting my brother know you're scared is never a smart thing to do. He began to make fun of me, teasing me that the dog was going to get into the house and eat me. Occasionally, he would go to open the door and taunt like he was going to let the dog into the house. My other brother and I would cringe and scream for him to close it right now. He would, but our fear just made him tease us even more. At one point that night, my brother grabbed my cat and tormented me by grabbing it and threatening to throw it out the door so the dog could kill it. While I was crying and begging him to stop, he opened the door just a bit. He was shocked to see the husky was right there. It began to bark and growl at him and startled him greatly. The cat freaked out and clawed the hell out of my brother's hand. It got loose and immediately ran in the opposite direction. My brother was pissed off now, but he couldn't take it out on the cat. Instead, he decided to take it out on the dog. Fair warning, there's some animal cruelty here and it's quite graphic. The most traumatizing thing I've ever experienced in my life happened next. My brother ran into our parents' room and grabbed my dad's shotgun. We begged him not to, but his hand was bleeding from being clawed at, and he was angry. He took the gun and sprinted outside, slamming the door in our faces. Then, right in front of our eyes, as we looked out the window, we saw our brother shoot and kill that husky. All we could do was scream and cry. My brother came back in and dragged us out into the dark with him. He made us grab shovels and made us go and bury that dead husky. It was terrible. The shotgun blast had torn the poor thing to shreds. It was traumatizing to see an animal looking like that. It was past midnight now and hot outside. We lived way out in the country. We were both in shock from what we'd just seen, and here we were digging a grave for a poor animal who hadn't done anything wrong other than come to our yard. It took 2 hours, but finally we got it buried rather deep. The next day was absolute hell. My other brother and I tried to brush off the entire incident as if it were nothing. I had never known anyone who could care so little for the life of an innocent creature as my brother did. After that dreadful day, we were trying to watch some movies later at night to get our minds after what happened. As midnight approached, I heard the scariest thing I'd ever heard in my life. I heard the exact same bark as we'd put up with the past 3 nights in our front yard. My older brother looked really shocked, but it was nothing compared to how he looked when he got up and glanced out the living room window. He turned completely white and his jaw fell open. I moved up to get a look out the window with him, but he told me to sit back down. He closed the drapes and ran over to the front door and locked it. He came back over to the couch and sat down with the 2 of us. He kept on looking at that window until the barking eventually stopped. That was the last night we ever heard the barking. My brother went and dug up the grave of the husky after, but never told us whether the dog was still buried or not. I'm not 100% sure what really happened that night, but I will tell you one thing. My brother was never cruel to an animal after. When I was 12 years old, my dad got a really good new job, and we found a new house in a really nice area of town. It was the first time we'd ever moved, so it was a bit of an adjustment for me, even though it was in the same town. I didn't even have to change schools. One thing that helped was that I really liked the house. It was a brick building that had 3 floors and an attic. It was also enormous and obviously very old. The doors to all the rooms were wooden and had actual keyholes as well. I had never actually seen a door with a natural keyhole, except in cartoons. The floors were old hardwood that creaked when they were walked upon. It was like nothing I'd experienced before. It didn't take long for me to want to explore the entire house. It had a lot of extra rooms, and my mom had plans on using them for various things. A study, a sewing room, she even had a library, which was really cool because I loved books. A few months after we'd settled into the house, while we were eating dinner one night, my older brother said something really interesting. He told my mom there was an old woman up in the attic. "Stop trying to scare your little brother," my mom told him. He insisted he wasn't trying to scare anyone though. My mom really didn't believe him because he was always trying to pull scary pranks on me. When my brother continued to insist, my dad put his foot down and told him to stop. My brother would never defy my father, so he did stop. I could tell he was very displeased though. The following day, my brother got home from school the same time I did. Both of our parents were at work, so we were at home all alone. When I was in my bedroom changing out of my school clothes, my brother came to talk to me. He told me he hadn't been trying to scare me the previous night. He was really telling the truth. I assured him I believed him, even though I really didn't. He asked me if I wanted to go up into the attic with him and see the old woman then. I declined, telling him I had a lot of homework to do. He proceeded to tease me as big brothers tend to do, calling me a chicken and such. Eventually, I did give in, and he and I went on our way. The entrance up to the attic was on the 3rd floor of the house. It was this steep staircase that led up to an old door. I had been there a few times as we'd moved in, and really never had a problem with it. I did understand though how it could seem scary. I just always thought it was cool as the rest of the house was though. Being with my brother and knowing he was going to try and scare me when we got to the door, it did look a little bit foreboding now. My brother was walking in front of me. so I thought for a moment that he must have been sincere and not trying to scare me. If he was trying to frighten me, surely it would make more sense to just walk behind me and grab me at an opportune moment. He opened up the door, and the two of us walked into the attic together, with him going first again. The attic itself was a bit ominous. It was a large area that didn't have any drywall up, just a lot of bare insulation. It was huge and full of all sorts of things my parents had put up there, and some others from before as well. My brother pointed to a Christmas tree sitting in the corner of the room. Must have been left over from the previous owners, I assumed. He was pointing towards the tree because that's where he had seen this old woman. Despite the fact I was expecting him to scare me, something like a jump scare, I leaned forward and squinted to get a closer look. While I was looking, I heard the attic door slam shut behind me. Angry I'd fallen for the trick, I turned around, only to see my brother standing far away from the door, real fear in his eyes. He was looking over in that direction, so I turned around and looked too. Standing behind the tree, looking at us through the branches, was what looked like an old woman, peering at me. I began to back away towards the door, even though I knew this was not going to do me any good. As I did, I saw the woman reach forward and with her scrawny, bony hands, move the branches to the side. She reached out with the other and beckoned me to come closer. She opened her mouth, and I could see maggots wriggling around on her gums. She made this awful moaning noise. I'm not proud to tell you I screamed like Jamie Lee Curtis and ran to the door. Although it had slammed shut, I was happy to know that the horror movie cliché of a slammed door becoming inexplicably locked did not apply here. I opened that damn door and grabbed my brother to sprint out of that attic. I told my parents what happened later, but they never believed me. They thought it was my brother's taunting that had influenced my imagination. As far as I'm aware, neither of them experienced it. I've had to go back into the attic at later points in my life, but I never saw that woman again. I'll never forget that image though, and neither will my brother.